Space.
Oh my gosh, how could you feel that guy?
Yeah.
You know, we someone for the day window. Yeah. You never see outside, you know,
Yeah.
Hey. I didn't know I changed his mind. Yeah, it's just like, yeah. We'll take care. Really on.
Thank you for your goodie bag of choice. Thank you. Feel free to grab more. Or even half.
It's
You
me.
never know. It's all good. Jerking on ones.
Reese's. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, everybody. I know it's good with you guys. I'm Siobhan Callahan, I'm the interim director here at WBNA. Been here just over a year, last November I started. And I know that Kari Lang, who's here for many, many years, is planning to show up too, so she can fill in for the historic parts that I may not be fully up to speed on. Rebecca Atwood, our board president, had planned to be here and give these notes, these comments before we start, so I'm gonna do that for her. So thank you all again for coming. We're here to talk about the Armory, and we know it's been a really long time since the public has heard any updates. And so we're really glad to be joined here tonight by Senator Sam Bell, Representative-elect Vicky Sanchez, and our City Councilor Rachel Miller. They'll all be offering some thoughts and perspectives. Some up front. Hey, coffee. I'm just starting to welcome, so. And I also just want to note for everybody that representatives from the public were invited, but weren't able to be here tonight. Sure we'll get into why of that at some point. So once these guys introduce themselves, we'll then open it up for questions and so the state, the division, the DCAM, I forget all the acronyms. They responded to our invitation by inviting us to a meeting in January where they hope they'll be able to have more information to then share that we can then share with you all. So we're hoping to make that happen as soon as we can after the new year, and again we'll keep everybody updated. But we hope that at least tonight you can get some of your questions answered by our elected officials. I just wanted to share a little bit of the WBNA perspective and some history for those of you who may not know all of it. So we're first really excited that there's been some progress. It's been a decade-long journey, as a lot of you do know, to utilize the Cranston Street Armory and bring activity and people inside the building. We've had a long history of advocacy for use of the building, and under Kari Lang's leadership and continuing on since her retirement, we've operated with some principles about how the Armory should be developed. Do we need some more chairs? I think we might have chairs. Yes. We're putting out some more chairs. So three main things we want to just put out there, that we have always operated from the place where we want it to be an inclusive and public process of engagement with all stakeholders. Here it is. DCAM, which is the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance, started a process in 2016 that was credited as among the most inclusive and equitable public processes the state has ever undertaken. The process also includes an Armory steering committee made up of a diverse group of neighbors, advocacy groups, and city and state preservation and planning officials. Our second priority has always been an inclusion of a publicly accessible element of whatever development plan. So we're excited about things like connections between the building and next to the training ground, and we'd like to see features like a public bathroom facility. The third item is a clear and transparent communication process between any developers, state officials, and neighbors. So the Armory Steering Committee serves as part of that mechanism of transparency, and communication is what tonight is about as well. We're obviously looking forward to more details as they emerge, as the state is ready to share. Sorry. So, all of you know that in the news said that the Armory will be used as a and obviously there's new news just at 6, I think, this evening. So we just wanted to let everybody know that doing our part to address the housing crisis and the needs of our neighbors without homes is a priority of WBNA. Our Community Development Committee, the CDC, is actively advocating for affordable housing in our area. We're building an affordable housing unit on Bridge in Westminster. We also partner all the time with other organizations who work on this issue. So it's really something we do care about and are engaged on. we had inquired with the city and state about what we can do to help the in-towns, and so we were heartened to learn that they have a plan for the warming center. In our view, there's no conflict between the efforts to temporarily serve the unhoused and the progression of the redevelopment plans that so many people have worked hard for. So we just want to make that piece clear. It's a really big space. Warming center is going to take up a teeny little space of that, part of that. So there's definitely room for more to happen. So without further ado, I want to introduce our co-hosts. Start with Councilor Rachel Miller.
All right, thanks, John. And it's probably
Yeah.
I mean, pulling the chairs in. Thank you all for coming on this cold night. It's very close to a variety of holidays. I appreciate everyone being here. I also am, so I guess a few things. So I'm excited that we're moving towards both long-term development plans for the Armory and the warming center plans. I want to recognize a couple of people in this room who've been part of this conversation for a very long time, including Representative Williams and Carly Lang, who's both here. Thank you both for advocating for the neighborhood, for the Armory and some of the panel, of course, in a minute. There's a lot that I also want to learn about this proposal, so I'm also here to learn and to advocate for the questions that the neighborhood has. I think Siobhan did a great job of especially articulating the piece around public access to the building that has kind of long been in our hearts in this neighborhood throughout the west end of Federal Hill. It's excited to hear that continue to be articulated, and I'm going to turn it over. We don't have representatives from the state here tonight, but I will be a strong advocate for any questions that folks have moving forward.
Everyone, thank you so much for being here with us. Enrique Sanchez. I will take the time to thank everyone for joining us. I look forward to working alongside Senator Sandell, Councilperson Rich Miller, and making sure I do my parts as time, and advocating and building bridges among our communities. As a bilingual Latino person, I want to also do outreach with small businesses, our Spanish-speaking population, our Black and Brown communities, and also work with our communities here. That's what I intend to do. And be held accountable. You all, I think those of you have my number, my contacts. But if anything, I can pass you information. I can direct questions. Thank you.
So thank you all again for coming out here. I really appreciate all the work the WBNA has done, not just to help host this meeting, but over the years, countless hours. There's been a long process. This has been, basically a 20-year process. I've been part of it for the past 4 years. It's been great to work with Councilor Miller and Chairman Williams and now Representative Sanchez and the wonderful people from the WBNA. And we have some exciting things planned. So the biggest thing is this: there is now a developer selected for the project, which is a very big hurdle. And where we're not entirely in is getting the project funded, getting the legislation written, getting all the details worked out. But we're making more progress than we have, honestly, in quite a long time. And I think I've established myself as someone who's willing to criticize the administration. But honestly, when it comes to this project, they have moved things forward far more than we have seen in a long time. And I really want to thank Director Thorson, Director Patton for their work. Because of some technicalities around the procurement rules, their lawyers decided that they probably couldn't come here while there was a process that was ongoing. I think it's not great yet. Unfortunately, there are all sorts of very strict secrecy requirements around what people are allowed to say if they are in DCAM when it comes to procurement issues. And so it would be hard for them to answer a lot of questions. But a couple of big things. One of the things that I heard meeting I held on this maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know if people remember that, but one of the big things that I heard, the message I heard, is that it's really important that control of the building not be entirely given up. And it's really important that community members have a role and a voice in how the building will be used going forward. So one of the things we've been talking to the developers about is we haven't put anything on paper yet, but is a compromise vision based off the Fort Adams Trust model, which is basically where we have a state board, and then underneath it, there would be a private developer who would work as a contractor. That's how a lot of these things work. Either we can still have a private entity handling all the day-to-day things, bringing in that expertise, but there's still open meeting protection. There's still an ability to have the public involved in how the building is going to be run over the long term. So that's sort of the compromise vision. You know, we're looking at, we don't have everything on paper, but I think we're coming around to that sort of overall vision. And I really want to appreciate developers for listening on that. Another thing that we heard is the importance of this project not trend towards gentrification. And we work hard to make sure that there's a social service component to this project. And those are things that I think are going to be really important conversations that we keep having as we get more of the details about. But I want us to announce the developer. The developer is Scout. We have Everett here, a representative from Scout.
Hi, everyone.
I want to say a little bit about them and then let Everett come up and say a few words. So Scout has done a lot of important work in Philadelphia. They were involved in renovating two old buildings with somewhat similar challenges to the Armory, the Bach building and an old church in Philadelphia. They've taken over their main Providence project within the Dime House in Old New York, which was Jay Shock's Studios, who's one of our trendiest and most exciting potters who left because of some of the problems we were never able to fix with 610 and some things going on. And unfortunately, it's like moved out and they've taken over the space. And I think it's really important that we have a developer who has a vision that respects the historic integrity of this building. I know a lot of people have long memories of this building, and it's really important that we have a vision that respects that. And that's something I'm really hopeful that we're thinking back toward that. And it can be harder to find new ways. So with no further ado, I'd like to have Everett come up and just say a few words about the project, and then we'll take some questions. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Everett. Maybe easiest to start with a little bit of my background. How we got here. I went to URI in '99 to 2003, so that's kind of my initial connection with Rhode Island. I met my wife there. Her family's from South County and some family up here in Providence. So this kind of became our surrogate home for the last 17 years. So a lot of time spent up here. Just I'll kind of clear the Scout as the development firm project was Bach. My personal project outside of Scout was the this one. Wasn't technically a Scout. I was one of the lucky recipient of one of Jay Shotz's bird feeders. That's how I met them. And when they were moving, I think they just cared about finding somebody who would steward, you know, a historic building in an area that they care deeply about. And I'm really proud of the project. I love the neighborhood. And our involvement with the Armory came about in 2019. We were informed about the RFP. And our experience in Philadelphia, in a big old historic building, it had a lot of challenges. You know, I think there's a lot of scar tissue in many cities about what happens to schools and vocational schools that close, especially in neighborhoods, you know, that are Black and brown, that are on the socioeconomic rung. And so that building has been a project over 7 years. It's not residential, so the entire building is a portable workspace. It's kind of a place where people can still make mess and make sound. A lot of the infrastructure of vocational schools allow for that. So with a lot of gas, and we've got a glass building, basically using that, you know, a lot of sinks. And so we have a health clinic. It's a project that was iterative and it was fine. And you can imagine huge castle in the middle of the city. It's exactly what we built in Philly, so I think we've got some experience and that this project is similar. There's a lot of impact. And how does that happen? I think the gradual development of is really how we see the Armory. So the initial activation and access to the building is the most important thing, and how you do. I think agency for community, how you build trust, is about just opening up the door. So when we made our proposal, a lot of it was centered around, I think, really what was echoed in the steering committee's desires, which was proposals that come in for a hotel, I think, prior to us, for residential, for a charter school, and then I think it was a big event space proposal that was on the RFP. And what I can share, because I know Senator Powell and Representative Sanders can share, that as the selected developer, I have to be mindful of the state requirements, because this is still an ongoing process. But what we proposed for the building was essentially affordable workspace that took into consideration that the challenges around redeveloping a historic site and many of the challenges that have been said over the last 30 years about egress and life safety were challenges created by trying to, what I call overdevelop the building. And so we have a really light touch approach that is very different than previous proposals, which called for $100 million to be spent on the building, I think, in 2015, which in today's money might be $170 million. So, and really use what's there. If anybody has been in the Armory lately, the building has been unbelievably well kept. They've got fire suppression in the building. They've kept the roofs clean. They've removed the windows. And I know it doesn't look great from the outside, but it's actually preserved a lot of the historic infrastructure that was there. And our proposal kind of just looks to say, let's work with what we've got. Let's create affordable workspace in the towers and in the basement, and then use the drill hall as a public amenity and an extension of the park. And I think this was directly in line with kind of what we read in the steering committee. And then our further proposal after meeting with Senator Bell, I think it was 2 years ago in the park, was to adopt an oversight of the public aspect of the building with the drill hall, so that there was, kind of agency from the community, from state representatives and city representatives. I will say in our experience so far, this project was awarded in 21. And there was a series of changes in government. The governor resigned from Secretary of Commerce. The DOA director announced his candidacy for mayor, because he was the mayor-elect. And the woman who was really carrying the torch, Carol Cornelison, unfortunately. And so the new DCAM director, David Patton, and the DOA director, Director Thorson, immediately picked up this file in June of 21, called us up and said, we want to make something happen. So I think the thing that excited us was that the state was still excited about the project. And they asked us to do essentially a pretty robust costing exercise, what people would call pre-development services. That includes architectural, engineering, safety analysis. And that takes about a year. And they said, can you do it in 5 months? And we agreed. And we had some really wonderful local professionals, architects, and some huge consulting and council form. And we kind of went through a process of the building to understand its cost to get the building open, a phased approach to how quickly can we open the building, and have submitted that to them at the end of the month. So our engagement was for that purpose, and I think the state now takes that next step of trying to figure out budget and other elements to the redevelopment of this. I'm sure some people heard about an early event that we were looking to do for the Light Cup. We spent about the better part of a month getting the building ready. Probably saw people doing construction outside on the ramp. We were working to make sure that the building was ADA compliant. We were working on egress routes, bulbs inside of fire exits, that sort of thing. When the state contacted us about the warming shelter, we just said, use our permission. We had already gone through the state fire marshal's office, because while we were using the drill hall and they were using the ballroom, the egress paths are all kind of independent. So we felt that it was more important to move that process along than to host, your soccer event. Although we do think that that would have been a great day for people to feel welcome in the building from kind of all the different areas that surround, the Armory. And, I'm a huge fan of got family up here, I've got friends up here, I spend a lot of time with my children up here. I think, this city has got a lot to offer. I think that the people here and my experience at the High House project kind of opened up my eyes to a community and a neighborhood that really cares about what happens on this west end and beyond. And I think that's the things that excite us the most, and I know that we've been able to communicate that with the state. And so while this has been a long period of time, I feel like we've been in a 2-year, limbo, and I get calls from Carter and Anastasia, and I, say, well, we're still here, we're interested, and we want to move this thing forward. I think what Senator Bell has said is that the state has moved at an unbelievably fast pace over the last 4 or 5 months since the summer, when I think they were just sorting through a transition of governor and leadership and this sort of thing. So I think that's enough background about me. I mean, I'm very hopeful and excited that we get to see this building become of use again to the community. I'm happy to share about our project in Philly. You can pick it up if you want, and kind of see the work that's been done there, but I think it mirrors a lot of the work that we have.
So, we want to take questions, but first I want to talk very briefly about where we are in the budget process. Because this project has always moved, it needs to pay for it. I'm excited that, Director Patton listened to us and has increased his request under RIDECAP in what's the agency request. The way the budget process works is first each agency puts in their request, and then the governor sorts through all those requests and makes a final decision. So we aren't yet at the governor proposing it, but we've gotten to the first step to actually have a quasi-significant financial contribution to actually start this process. Not enough money to finish the project, but there is actually a proposal that is started in the official channels to actually get a significant percentage.
Oh, you might get things like you it, but not just for those.
We've got more work to do, write legislation, craft all the details, but at this stage, I think that's a really important first step. So that's where we are in terms of getting project money. So with that, I know people have questions. We would like to take them. Yes.
What's the time frame? Are we looking at 3 years or?
We don't put our goal is to never put a shroud over the building or scaffolding and then have some sort of ribbon cutting moment. I think our goal is to try and put up parts of the building right away because we believe that they're usable, and we think that we can get the building inspectors and code and life safety to agree with us on that front. So, whether it's something that's interim use or an event, was kind of the goal initially. I can share this, because I don't think it's germane to the negotiations of the state, but one of the most critical pieces of this project is a city-owned property, not a state-owned property, which is the parking. And right now, the building is not accessible for someone in a wheelchair, someone with disability. So that landing ground and that ability to connect the park and the building is really critical to the project. And so I think what you'll see is parts of the building get activated early. And when I say early, within a year of the time where we finish kind of our pre-development work and get final drawings and engineering together. But it's not a project that's going to be, we're all done 5 years later.
This is what we've done like in pieces.
Yeah, I think a lot of the parts of the building that are on the upper floors, have been proposed for a significant amount of construction and development work. And they're really lovely, usable spaces in the condition that they're in. And I think a lot of people for the past 20 years have been trying to put uses that were more intense in the building, therefore requiring a deeper response for construction. And that's just not our approach. So I think addressing some of the occupancy and egress issues, when you don't try and turn this into a hotel or a residence, makes kind of life a lot easier for all of us to get this building active soon.
So answer that question. I think, to be honest, finishing a project is gonna depend on getting the project funded to the state level, whether certain federal opportunities we get. It comes down to a question of the money. And we can't answer that right now because how life works.
I was getting in the perfect world if the money was there, but,
The money is there to, hopefully, we really hope the money is there to actually get the building open. Getting the project finished, we're hopeful we'll get the money there. You're not at that stage yet. I wanna be honest about it.
I think a lot of advocacy though from this community has gotten us to this point. And I think what to recognize today is that I think in the last 15 years, the state budget has never been as robust as it's been now because of ARPA dollars and other kind of influx of capital that allows them to take on these types of decisions. So you kind of got a oddly perfect storm that if we continue to, as a community advocate for the project, I think there's an ability to where in the past, we don't know how realistic.
And, I forgot, I think in my, recognition, I forgot to recognize the tireless years of advocacy that Kari has put into this building. She has worked so incredibly hard. We'd never be here without her. So I really want to just take this opportunity to thank her for countless hours over multiple decades of fighting for this.
I guess send around the link of your C-SPAN video for 96.
We'll get back to questions. Yes,
How is this related to the?
good question. The development of the project is separate from the warming shelter. We heard, I remember at the elected officials night, I got a question about what we can do, like, to make sure that we have infrastructure to support our homeless neighbors here in our community. And people have had concerns that for years, it's been really hard to actually find a place to put any. Because so often, many of my colleagues are all for this unless it's in their districts. And that will never be me. And what I commit, and I committed at our neighborhood night, and I commit again, is that I will always fight to make sure that we have the resources and actually be place, a physical place where the most suffering people in our community can get services they need.
So I think a lot of people's concerns are just surrounding the number of shelters that already exist. Maybe not this neighborhood, but this side.
I think we have a shortage of beds. We have people sleeping out on the streets. We have hundreds of people, and people debate the numbers. But, they say we have a shortage of 500 shelter beds.
That's not the issue.
That's not the
It's
issue.
probably much more than that. There's such a need out there. And that's, as a state, we need to address that. But our community, we have absorbed lots of social services over the last 40 years our neighborhood had. And we're not debating the needs for it. There's such a need. But I think that our community should really protest at the state level to mandate housing and not just a neighborhood that volunteers to have space, but mandated across the city process.
We have all these new houses that are developed. If they force them to put so many homeless in each one of those houses, we wouldn't have a homeless problem right now. We have a homeless problem because you're looking for a place to put them all. You're looking to separate them out and put them in a place. If you made the community, all of it, absorb them, all these new developments that all went up, there's plenty of room for housing.
Scattered site housing, it was, scattered site housing works. Scattered site housing, affordable housing, Section 8 works. But if you put everybody together, well, the warming shelter is different. But you know, I just, Sam, we let you represent us.
Mhm.
And it's the state and the city's responsibility, but particularly the state,
Mhm.
to create affordable housing, but across neighborhoods, not just, you know, we are giving, loving people in our, in this community particularly.
I feel like our neighborhood's already suffering.
People are
We're
suffering.
crossroads, and since they've made the YMCA crossroads, I can't keep anything in my backyard that's not tied down.
We,
It's just a fact.
look, there's a reality here. We need infrastructure to support our homeless community.
Absolutely.
These warming centers are necessary. It is very cold out right now. There are people who will die because they don't have access to a warm bed to sleep in. We have a human need here.
That's right.
And yes, it is true that a lot of people will say, we need this, just not in our neighborhood. You know, and it's important to me that we actually provide a real place to have this infrastructure. It is critically important. Now, in terms of this project, it's unrelated, it won't derail the project, but I think it is great that we have an opportunity to save some lives.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
One, that road that needed, and it's gonna help out the major product ways and whatnot. But considering there is a major leak in the room that these homeless will be sleeping at the Armory, has that building been tested for mold, asbestos, or anything like that as we speak? Because water damage is serious.
Yeah.
And not only that, nothing against you, Everett. But what is up with Rhode Island hiring all these developers out of state? Why are we funding our own communities and our own developments here in Rhode Island? Why is Rhode Island constantly going out of state and grabbing these developers? Should the Supreme build downtown? And they're only concerned about filling that building with 80 to 120% AMI. Screw the 30% AMI though. Because we keep getting these developers from out of state that don't know the true statistics and demographics of the state itself. That's all I gotta say. It's a little ridiculous that we keep getting these out of state developers in here. And all they care about is 80 to 120 AMI.
Yeah, well, so this, I want to answer that because you're absolutely right about the Superman bill. This is not how.
No, but I'm saying in general,
But-
why is that? No, plenty of in-state developers, plenty of in-state providers. Why do we keep grabbing from out of state in this state?
Well, so I think there are reasons for that, right? And when it comes to the Superman building, I thought that was a bad project, right? And I voted against the bill to allow that special tax deal, because I thought it was an abusive project. It is important that we stand up and fight back against these abuses. It was wrong to steal half of province's affordable housing bond or fake affordable units in the Superman building. That was wrong. And we are losing units because of that. And we have to fight back against things like that. And that is true. But I would urge people, look, and I'll be honest, I was born in Connecticut. You know, there are people who might not have been born here, might not even actually live within the state of Rhode Island, who are still reasonable human beings. And what I think is problematic is when we give tons of our money in corporate welfare to luxury developers coming in from out of state, and that's what I've always fought against, and I will continue to fight against. I don't think that's what we're doing.
What about my first question too?
Yeah.
The mold, asbestos, I've been checked.
There are,
I have a video right here on my phone of the severe water leak damage in the ceiling, right where people's heads will be. Right where people's heads will be. The cops are right in front of the table and has the water coming down from the ceiling on it, right where the head of people be. Has it been any testing for asbestos, mold, or any kind of testing done later that in general? Let it all too.
This is an old building. I can't speak to all those specifics because I don't have access to that information, but what I will say is this.
Well, listen to you, the developer, why can't he speak? Or, I'm pretty sure he should.
No, I'm not gonna, I mean, what we know the building inspector. State fire marshal.
Who was the building inspector? Was that, the ships?
No, his name is Jonathan DePaul, he works for DEP. And his brother. And so we were in a separate space that didn't have a leak. The warming shelter is in the ballroom on the Parade Street segment. Yeah. And I know that they were working through the issues. They did address them. They were in the building probably since the governor's announcement. It was probably 2 weeks ago. I haven't heard any information back, but I know that the building inspector will not allow the space to be available until they're addressed. I think they gave them, I know the public will be on a list of issues that they need to.
And I'll be sure to see the adequate job of doing their job.
I hope so. I think the people we work with.
Do you hope so, or do you know so?
I don't have specific.
Okay.
I want to get to, Representative Williams' questions.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to say that everybody knows what the problem is as far as the housing crisis that we've been facing. It's not anything new. It has exacerbated and it's bigger of a much bigger problem now. The major problem being on the housing commission and being a legislator dealing and fighting for this issue is that the corporate welfare, the special legislation that are being put out there, especially this year when those 11 pieces of legislation that came out in favor of developers claiming to address the housing crisis. The AMI is at 120. In fact, Block Island, we raised it to 140 because, you know, Block Island is pretty rich areas. However, with the legislation that I submitted for 80% AMI and less, got fought tooth and nail because it does not appease and it does not play well with those developers that are in here building these luxury units. That's not addressing any of the problems that we are faced with. The housing crisis is predominantly affecting low-income people, people with disability, and individuals whose issues are overwhelming to them and to the state. But it's easier to shun those individuals and deal with those high-rise luxury developers because it's about the money. At the end of the day, it's about the money. If you want, go look at those 11 pieces of legislation that came out of the housing commission. There are two that's just really not anything, but you will see. Not in my backyard and trying to have legislation with counting trailer homes as low-income housing so that we cannot build any more low-income housing in other cities or towns other than Providence, Rhode Island, and utilize our spaces as shelter for these individuals that deserve a place to live. So it starts with the leaderships and legislation that the community needs to come out and advocate if you really want to make a difference and handle the solution at hand. Because we'll be back here next year talking the same thing. We'll be back here at the end of the year talking the same thing. And these people that are unhoused are going to be here. The numbers are going to be higher. And it's going to be just round around the bush like we've been going around the bush. It's a matter of you all advocating and demanding, just like you demand for other stuff that happens. This is a crisis that's affecting each and every one of you in your community. It may not seem like it because they're not coming in your backyard like they're coming in this lady's backyard, but it's just going to get worse before better. Got to put a foot on the neck of those individuals who are getting these free passes in this development that's going on in this city. And trust and believe, there's a whole lot of developments that are going on in this city and in this state that's 120 AMI, and it's not for the people that they're claiming, $250 million earmark for housing that everybody's heard about. Please know that $250 million is not directed solely to housing. $million is directed to different issue points in that budget. So please be vigilant, because if you want to address this crisis, look at the real issue at hand. Look at who is benefiting, connect your dots, look at who is behind it, underneath it, on top of it, and around it. It's not anyone who's in need of these houses. People are jumping from couch to couch, and they're not counted in that 500 plus homeless. There's a whole lot more to it. So I just say to you, do your due diligence and call their elected officials up there. Not necessarily these two, but I'm saying, or these three. I'm saying those that make those final decisions, because they're the ones who run in the show. Period. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to say, I agree with that. I voted against a lot of those bills, all the ones that got Senate, I believe. And it's true. This year, the supposed bills to help affordable housing were largely about making it harder to build affordable housing in the suburbs. And that was wrong. And that's the reality we live in the state. Those are policies in our state, and those policies are wrong. And there's a crisis because of political decisions made at our state house. It's a national crisis, but it is way worse here because of policy decisions made at the state house that I think are wrong. I think we need to keep fighting, and I will keep fighting.
And let me just add to this, I'm sorry. I was the vice chair, and the vice chair of that commission, and didn't know one thing about those bills that were submitted in the press release done. I knew nothing about them, and I'm supposed to be part of the commission. So that tells you a lot right there.
And I want to add something, if you guys don't mind. So I'm a local like contractor builder in the area. My family builds houses from the ground up. I'm also Latina, as you know, Enrique said, and I'm very proud that my brother was able to do that. But unfortunately, we're not able to grow within the business because we're always getting subcontracted by these big companies. So instead of us being able to say, hey, we can go to your door and speak to you, we can't, because people tell us what to do. People send us an invoice and then we get buried to the ground. Why? Because we don't have the proper paperwork. There's no business around here that can tell you that I can go to somebody and say, how do I file these taxes properly so I can go and build something for the state, be part of RI dot. No, I have to be a WBE. That means I have to say I'm a minority. And for me to be able to be a part of the project, I can't be a contractor. I have to be a minority. Another thing is, I'm only 24 years old. I'm looking for an FHA. I can't do that right now. Why? Because I can't be a first-time home buyer because the market's so bad. I can't go to Paragon Mills, if you guys know that they're building a Ponyville, because I'm medium income. So what can I do, guys? I can't do anything but come to these meetings and support and try to have our Latino people, have our, everybody come together, and try to actually voice something. But my generation, for so's sake, is kind of stuck. So that's why I'm here supporting and hearing everybody out, and I agree.
Yes.
Alright, so I got two things. And those of you that don't know me, my name's Adam Northrup, I've been all over the news. And all over every single press conference there is to figure out. I been seeing everything going on, and you know what? There's $50 million. Where'd that go? For the homeless. Where'd that go? Support the homeless. There's 15 million that providers have. Where's that? They're not using it. I don't take it back.
The governor, I think, was able last year to get this done. To actually create enough shelter beds for everyone. It can be done. We have more than enough money. And he has failed. And it's really sad. And there is more than enough money available for this. Not actually all that expensive. And it's unfortunate that we haven't gotten it.
Yeah.
Are we
Yes,
allowed to
I
speak
appreciate
on
the
Zoom?
post that mentioned essentially the concentration of poverty here. That's something that's neglected. A part of, I'm speaking for myself here, but it's a project with the South Providence Neighborhood Association. We have an impact assessment that we were doing in terms of the Crossroads expansion. And it's just the concentration of poverty isn't good for anyone. I do blame the politicians by, allowing their, our kindness to be taken advantage of. It just doesn't make sense, So the other neighborhoods absolutely need to help out as well. The Skywood site development projects are the way to go. So I'm working on this issue like proactively and frankly trying to stop some of the expansion. So I'll just give you some statistics. In terms of Crossroads, 160 Broad Street, we talk about things being nailed down. In the past 12 months, they have 498 police calls, sexual assaults. But like, a handful of sexual assaults, about 40 just regular assaults, stabbings. Gentlemen, they were brought up to the nuisance task force recently, which is unheard of for an agency like that. They kind of let a lot of things slide. Thankfully, our councilwoman brought them to the nuisance task force because a gentleman who needed the care didn't get the care. He was run over in the street. We have testimony of the graphic details of it. Basically, they're getting money to warehouse people, housing first model, whatever it may be, but they're not giving people the proper services, and they're getting people. It isn't about us. It's about people from out of state. The neighborhood. This part of the neighborhood, you guys probably have it a little easier over here, but you do have a concentration as well. It's maybe 50% black or whatever it may be. The people at the tower are 70% white. They're taking people from out of state and whatever, and they're putting them here. And frankly, we want to help people, obviously, but they're taking people with challenges and they're not giving them again the right services. So it becomes bleeds in. They're impacted right there, and then it bleeds into the neighborhood. Another very alarming statistic: 550 ambulance calls in the past 12 months. Believe it or not, 485 of those calls were life support calls. So I was on the phone with the lawyer for the city today because I got all like the formal documents showing this, and I wanted it transcribed and the like, but they don't have any of that. So it's just that's just what it is. So there needs to be a formal investigation of what's going on. We can't just frankly no offense, but just say people just kind of appeal to our just goodness. Oh, people are going to die, so we just have to take it all here. No, in the long run, more people are going to die when you have everyone with particular issues on top of each other. And I have testimony of folks saying they go to Crossroads, they can't get clean because they're allowing rampant drug use, and they're just allowing anything to happen because you can do it here because we're allowing it to happen. So anyone that's actually wants to be proactive on this, please let me know. Let's talk after. We're actually making some progress on it. Just real quick, let me just make sure if there's any other statistics. But yeah, frankly, people are getting hurt there, and our politicians are just allowing it because whatever deals they're making, for the Providence folks, whatever they're offering them, Providence politicians are like, hey, we'll take it. It's fine. Let me get another bill or whatever it may be, and they're getting off the hook in the other areas. So it's bad for the people there. They're being harmed again, and it bleeds into a neighborhood, a predominantly minority neighborhood. And I won't even talk about the homeowners or anything, how it affects those folks. People don't really care about minority wealth building, but that's a big part of it as well. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I really appreciate everyone bringing up housing. I personally am feeling housing crunch right now. Housing is a hot. I get it. I want buildings on all these empty ones. Period. But I don't think that this is a housing problem, right? What I'm hearing is that if we try to turn the Armory into housing, it's really expensive to do all these upgrades that propose demands of housing. And so it's just not possible for us to do some housing. So I totally agree that we need tons of new housing in this neighborhood and every neighborhood in the city. I just don't think that is a subject. It can't be because the money doesn't make sense. And the money here is what I'm primarily concerned about. I totally get you about out-of-state developers coming here and milking our communities for all the money that we're worth. To be honest, I can see a kind of difference between developers in state and developers out of state who get big tax breaks for luxury apartments. So I'm fairly anti-developer, and at the same time, I've seen the Bach project that you did in Philly, and I think this is kind of the only recent development that I've seen that I thought really fit into the neighborhood, community, and character. Wasn't designed to displace people to make money. And so I'm really excited about the fact that the Armory can be getting revitalized without pushing people out. And I'm pretty curious about the revenue streams that you're envisioning. So mentioned micro offices and then an event hall. Are you envisioning any revenue streams or anything building beyond that? also like what's the approximate breakdown between those two revenue streams for like any other ones? And then third question is how much money, if any, in tax breaks is this project getting from the city and the state? And like who is going to own this project going forward between this like state board and whatever private company set up?
I'm happy to answer as much as I can. Let me just start with, we would never own the building. The state would own the building. That was a requirement of the RFP when we published it. And so the goal of the RFP, who maybe those who weren't around when it was initially published or when we were kind of engaged in the process, I think there were 3 stages. Ari, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was an RFI, an RFQ, and then an RFP. So it went into, I think, a larger set of developers responded to an RFI. And I think there were local developers who wanted to turn the building into, one was a hotel, one was a residential project, and the other was a charter school. And that was then handed to a company called UTL who did an analysis, and they put out a request for qualifications, and that pool of Rhode Island-based developers shrunk a little bit, I'd say by half. And there were some submissions for other ideas. In our submission, I believe there was 2 or 3. It was 2, yeah, 2 finalists, I forget. And one of the developer that was proposed that was from Rhode Island, or actually they were from Atlanta, sorry. They were proposing essentially a concert venue wrapped around a soundstage. And the soundstage was something that was already going on because Disney would happen to be in the building at the time. Focus 2, so it was kind of close to the piece. So to circle back, we came in, the building kind of distribution of the economics of the building are such that almost 3/4 of the revenue was planned from renting office space. And our proposal is at a 30 to 40% below market rate of a kind of the cost of rent space in Providence, so affordable workspace. I think there's a difference between the lower level, which is slightly above grade because it's got infrastructure there, like concrete floors and drains, and there was a firing range. It's a 4-course thick brick, so you could have things like a lighting, light manufacturer down there, or water switches down there, or those who could kind of use the existing infrastructure. The idea is that the towers in the basement provide almost 90% of the revenue in order to make the drill hall public immediate. So essentially, there would be people who would come in for drop-in soccer leagues, and we spoke to 3 or 4 of the Latino kind of groups that have adult and juvenile soccer leagues that need space indoors, and spoke to schools that don't have kind of indoor recreation space. And the idea is that the drill hall is an extension of the park. It's really a public amenity. And that goes for bathrooms, that goes for access. Yeah, a mix of turf, these sort of court. Yeah, that's the idea. And then
Which are like in the drill hall.
yeah, a portion of it, that's kind of what our idea and our proposal was. And then I think that what it did for the upper floors is it took away all these requirements to add millions and millions of dollars in infrastructure, cats and elevators. The third part of your question was,
So like how much money is the state, maybe the second percent every day, how much money is the state expecting right now to spend on this project? And then like, are there other funding sources? And then is the idea for the state board essentially to like run this after Scout kind of like develops it and gets it going, and then the state board runs it? And then like, what happens to that revenue? If there's a profit, where does it go? If there's like a deficit,
yeah, I could share what like our thoughts were around that, because I think that they challenged us to do and help the state understand the capital stuff. I can't talk about the number, but I'll talk about it in percentages. Is that something I'm allowed to do? I think direct patents and try to figure out how much we're allowed to say, because it's a kind of negotiation that goes on between the town and
Here, I'm more free. So I'm not part of the procurement process. I'm not bound by those. What I will say is that the amount of state money that goes to this project, is the amount that ultimately the legislature appropriates. What we know now is that we're hoping that we will get. I'm hopeful at the end of the day. Yeah, it probably will get cut down. I'm hopeful we'll get something in the $20-30 million investment through the RICAP program. And that's a substantial state investment. Is it enough to get the project all the way done? That is what I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do.
Do you know how much the total amount would be? Project?
We don't know the total amount for the project. The old cost estimate for the project, which was before cost inflation that has risen substantially around the project, was around 70 million. So I am guessing that the real number after some more inflation will be probably 80. But I don't know that for a fact, and I am guessing that. And that will depend on details of the project that have not been worked out yet. And we need to be able to have a system that will adjust for some of the realities about exactly how much money will be appropriated, how many federal funding opportunities we'll get, what kind of a system to put in place to make sure that there's some revenue sharing. Those kinds of details have not been finalized yet. And so we don't know 100% what that number is.
Like accounting for the fact that there's like a lot of variability, you know, how many years approximately you would think it would take to state itself? Are we talking like 5 years? Are we talking 100 years? Like
This is a state building, and the state is probably not going to make back every single penny. And if we wanted to do that, that would mean bringing in high-end commercial uses that I don't think are what is best for the neighborhood. This needs to be an investment in the community. I know we have had questions.
Maybe a better way just to give you like some clarity on it. The state currently spends $2 to $3 million just to keep the building operational, and that's without any deferred maintenance, and that's public. So look that up. With deferred maintenance, the state in the 2019 budget said they need $15 million to keep significant facade work continuing, roofs not to continue to degrade. So like they were planning to spend, $20 million.
May I suggest if everybody would take a look at our meeting rules, that everybody gets an opportunity to ask a question instead of the one person monopolizing the panel, please. So I know Dylan had a question, and I have 2 questions from Zoom that people would like to ask.
So, let's start with Dylan and then go to
Yes.
Zoom questions. Go to you.
You're in the middle of answering it. It's great.
Tough question.
Yes.
Let's do the Zoom question.
The person wanted to know if the people that are going to be using the Armory as a warming center, are they going to get wraparound services? And is the National Guard going to be there with compassion?
So the warming sensors, there was an announcement that there was about 50 people. They were gonna be able to house and provide shelter to 50 folks. Unfortunately, when the governor of the state announced the warm shelters, there was no one that picked up, no organization, no nonprofit, no direct housing service or group that took up the project. So that's why that's been a bump buried in the road to be able to find a provider to help with that warming center. And the second question, sorry.
If the National Guard's going to be there, and will they be there compassionately?
So the news was announced today that the governor announced the activation of the National Guard. So the team, the staff has not announced a plan or has not reached out to us, the councilperson, the senator, and the state elect on what's going to be the turnaround action plan.
I will say in their original announcement, like when we got 2 hours extra notice that all the public announcement, right?
Yeah.
So and wraparound services is something I asked about. It's like this is gonna be something with significant support services. I was told yes, and don't have more details than that.
Okay, thank you.
And the other 2 questions.
This was a 2-part.
Oh, I see those are 2
Yes.
questions. Yes.
Hi, Jason McCool. I'm new to the neighborhood and looking forward to, thank you. Looking forward to meeting a lot of my new neighbors. And welcome Everett. So I come from an arts background, and particularly music and theater, and I'm particularly interested in how this building can be activated using creativity. And you want to talk about one hidden key to spark the imagination of people who live in a neighborhood is start welcoming them with some programming, with some cultural programming, some music, some dance, like let's do it. Let's really do it. So I have a question for you, Everett, like having worked on this problem, this building in Philadelphia, what kinds of lessons have you learned there? Particularly in light of some of the questions that people have raised so far tonight. What have you learned about what it took to make that building successful? Have there been things that didn't work that you would not want to do again? And do you see any sort of arts integration with this magnificent building that I have never been in and can't wait to be in?
It is magnificent, and I think your question is really important because it's about. I think when you talk about programming, and really that's how our design development firm works. We kind of are very staff heavy on the programming side because 50 to 60% of the things that happen at Bach are really stuff that we either self-program or we collaborate with folks in the community. I think the first thing we learned, over the time of that project and what I think is relevant here is just giving people access to space is pretty darn important and critical in space that doesn't have a cost associated with it. So our biggest leap forward, honestly, in Philadelphia, we were in a community that was 40% Southeast Asian, immigrant community, 30% Latino, mostly people from Mexico and Guatemala. And then there were some legacy families that were part of that original Irish, Italian kind of immigration to the US. And there was an elders breakfast that was taking place 3 blocks away in a building that didn't have great heat, wasn't really suitable for kind of the types of meetings that they needed. And just opening up the building and saying, use our space, And oddly, that relationship, which lasted for 5 years, transitioned into our largest tenant to date, which is their partnership with Jefferson Hospital on a clinic that speaks like 14 languages, that are spoken at the other clinics that Jefferson runs. So it wasn't intentional. It's just about, I think, inviting folks in. And I think this building, we have to recognize it's a castle. It's a defensive structure by nature. It tells everybody stay out. And I think the first thing that we need to do is kind of like figure out what's that bridge into it. And I think by opening up the building and giving people agency that this is for their community is going to be the things that we learn and are really iterative in the process. I'll say overall, I think keeping the drill hall not only public, but with oversight, which is something we've leaned into. I think once we've heard this from the steering committee, is going to be one of the critical pieces here. We had Nato Thompson working with us, who was a part of Creative Time, who did the Kara Walker. Kara Walker, by the way, lived in Brett's house on the park, but Kara did the huge Domino Sugar installation to talk about these spaces, the places where people used to work, where families derived their income from, and that was a really interesting show. But in that, I think that working within the creative community and really, I think the perception of Providence is that that the town here is maybe puddle deep, and I believe it's ocean deep, but there's so much going on in the city.
I'm saying that.
Like only interesting things are happening in New York, and that's not the case here. And what we started to really uncover and only go first was we started looking at whether we were buying a piece of furniture or making it. It was amazing that we could do everything within a mile. That wasn't possible in the different places that we were looking at. And I think what you're kind of alluding to is how do you build a community that wants to support a community of development there that allows for that space to feel as much yours as it is yours. And I think by the early interventions of just giving people access is critical. And then the programming piece is really what people are geared to. At Bach, we just did open studios, 4,000 people come out for that. And more than half of those people live within a mile of the building. 80% of people who work at Bach walk to Bach. There's big questions about how do you lead community development that doesn't have impact? you know, it's a 350,000 square foot building, it's twice the size as the Armory. Oh, we're gonna be inundated with cars, we don't have parking there, you know, but that wasn't the impact when they think lead with affordability and kind of allow the neighborhood to dictate what are the uses that are critical to them in that building. And then it becomes a community amenity rather than, it's not intended in our perspective to be like an augmentation of a convention center. That's not our goal. I think we could have really wonderful cultural events there and art shows there, and installations. We've got great universities that know how to do this type of stuff. And I think our role is to be a bit of a Sherpa in navigating the things that we feel are going to be really important to people to feel that this building is part of their community. And I think a big part of that's also language. Okay, heard to talk about this before, but like, you know, we worked with Tati and Jose Menendez, who were a part of ASU 20, but like El Castillo is a big part of how we call and kind of identify this project, you know, and what the wayfinding is around the building, or kind of how we commemorate the 14th Regiment. You know, I think things have been looked at in a way in this building that we know there's history there. We don't know the full breadth of that history. We know that the reality is the back of this building shines on Cranston Street and creates a really dark spot of the commercial corridor. There's no moment of welcome there. I think our biggest role is to figure out how the people living on the other side of Cranston Street feel that this is a moment of invitation for them to see the people coming from the park, you know, look at this building. And so early access is why I said earlier that covering this building and scaffolding is just not the way this type of development works. And that leads to a longer term track. It doesn't mean you're going to be done in 5 years, 7 years. You know, that's not the box really not done. It's constantly evolving. The goal is how early can you get people in there to build trust?
And I just want to add quickly, as the incoming state representative, I'm just intrigued and fascinated and very thankful for the open transparency with Senator Sambal and I and other folks, with the willingness to be open and transparent with us and give us updates. Not a lot of developers do this, unfortunately, and it's a really a welcoming sign. And thank you. Thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
I have another question from Zoom. They want to know if the developer has done work on Kensington in Philadelphia.
We have not.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I've heard a lot about kind of the components of the park. Can you tell me more about the vision? When you say affordable workspace, what exactly does that mean? Like co-working?
It's not co-working. And then not that I'm against fair. I think that you look at, let's just call it the traditional practice of business. It's give me a tenant who's creditworthy, right? A big institution, take as much space as possible for as long as possible. So if I could then go to a bank and say, I've got surety of repayment, give me money. And we don't operate in it. So 60% of the leases at Bach are under a year or completely informal month to month, which gives people the agency to get off their couch and say, you know what, I want to take risk in life and take this business that was in my home and take it into a small space. You know, when you get approached with the construct of real estate of I need a lease or get all that up on my head, I'm going to get for $50,000 if this goes bad, then people don't make that move. So I think in order to foster kind of creativity and this, you know, like I'm a big fan of when I walk through Box, seeing the people who have jobs that I didn't know their jobs or do things I didn't know we needed to do for a living. And that wouldn't happen if we said that this was the way we did things, or this is what you must do and take a minimum of 1,000 square feet for at least 3 years. So what we end up with is a mix of nonprofits, a mix of graphic designer, therapists, and a small architectural firm, cooler, I mean, we have ESL classes at Bach, you know, so I think people think it's a building full of painters because there is that kind of like, you know, art-centric vibe in the public interaction of the space, but like 30% of Bach is professional services. Like I remember we get approached, and it's funny how little I knew about hairstyling because but I remember this woman came to us about opening. She said, I'm losing my space on Passion Avenue because I'm getting outpriced on the commercial corridor. Restaurants are coming, high-end development, and I no longer can afford the space. And I want to take the old beauty store. I thought we took it. And I think we were puzzled with this because I said, well, how are you gonna get customers? How are you gonna find it? She said, we don't know, you know nothing about my business. Nobody walks by a salon and says, oh, that's where I want to go. It's sort of mouth. It's, hey, my friend, Richard, get your hair done. And they'll go to an attic, a basement, you know, like, it doesn't matter. They'll find you. She's been in her business for for 6 years and thriving. She's doubled in space. And I think some of the things that traditional real estate has done for a really long period of time by building those constructs are the things that we kind of shy away from. So why we like short-term, not that we demand a short-term lease, but if you're a growing business, like how do you go into more space? How do you expand? Or if you're in a business that changed because of COVID, how do you contract? So I think that is kind of some of the secret sauce. How we see it is by giving people the ability to take risks, is by taking away some of the barriers that real estate has posed in the past. And I think that the state is oddly the best partner on this because they're not a bank. You know, the state has bought into this concept of affordable workspace, you know, which we were quite surprised on. We thought at some point they were going to turn around to us and say, love your ideas, thanks for sharing this with the public. Everybody feels warm and fuzzy, but we want X, you know, or we need to drive this. And they haven't said that. You know, and I think it says a lot about the representatives here. It says a lot about, I think, you know, Kari has, I don't know where you got the energy from. That's, you know, like 3 or 4 years, we've seen how much your work has really gone into the ethos of how the state thinks about the project. Anastasia, our walks around the park were tremendously helpful in helping this project move forward. And I think you've also got tailwinds of a mayor-elect who is formerly at the state who really cares about this project and wants to see something like this happen. So it feels like the wind's at everyone's back in this, and if this project, the way we presented it, feels something that the neighborhood can trust and kind of work within, I think it'll be a success.
Sounds ideal. It's sort of a way to bring people back to the workforce to the economy, to build interesting content. So
That's
I'm excited.
Yeah, we question up front here.
Yeah, I was just curious if, that kind of like proposals or materials that have like various visualizations and other aspects of the state, like, are those currently public? Is there a way to access that? Or I know in the midst of negotiations, I think kind of like that now.
So we did some very loose renderings and sketches in the original RFP. It's kind of weird how back of the napkin approaches end up becoming very close to how things end up panning out.
Sure.
We have worked with RISD's graduate program, who has been part of this process from day one. So they've had a studio in the class and helping us envision some of the wild things that could happen in the space and some of the traditional development paths. I think we could certainly share our RFP response. There is a work product that's currently in front of the state that we've been told is a part of our development negotiated contract that we can't share until that's done.
So I think what we can say, correct me if this is, you wouldn't agree with this, that a core element of the vision is a light touch approach to the building that respects its historic integrity, that is going to be directed around trying to preserve rather than come in and do wild and crazy things, as there have been other proposals to do. I remember there was a unnamed consulting group that I will not name out of Boston that proposed building towers in the drill hall. I think we can safely say that the vision is around a light touch approach that centers and focuses on historic residents. You agree with that?
Yeah, and I think feel like I have a really clear sense of it. I appreciate this meeting. Like, my goal is mostly for other folks who aren't present at this meeting to be able to share, like, hey, I heard about this really cool thing at like the community meeting and wanted to get the sense of like what's happening in this space.
Yeah, I think what I could say is that we took kind of challenges like ADA access and said, instead of just a ramp, how do we make the space feel more like a public invitation? So that's something utilizing the ramp isn't kind of like looked at as, yes, this is the only way I can get into the building. So creating almost like a stage and a way to navigate that the public would just use for sitting on a sunny day or having a lunch on would also serve as infrastructure that was critical to the building from both access and loading. So there is this idea of a connection to the park with something that feels very inviting. That I'm excited about.
In interim, while the space is being used for a warming shelter, do you have any faculty over being able to merge? I'm an artist, born in this just to put that out there. My grandmother came here from Puerto Rico as my mother, but my grandmother worked for the Department of Health for about 25 years. And also helped kind of get started the Southwood Cultural Center, and used to host a dinner for over 100 people once a month for quite a few years in that community to aid the elderly and Hispanic people. So I have a lot of attachment to the building community here as an artist. I'm also a single mother who was displaced in February with 4 children and cannot afford housing at all. I'm like, I don't want to leave Rhode Island, but there's not really anywhere for me to go. So that's an issue. And I also was a volunteer at the pop-up shelter at the American Fund that took place from January to about May. And I just shared a career with people on this and ended up volunteering for about 7 years. So I gained some of my experience in that time frame. But my question regarding the warming shelter is with using a light touch approach for the space in general, and then having this other action item take place to, house people that need it. Are you looking at merging any possible use to just create a feeling and, for that same question, a compassionate atmosphere for the people that are being helped? Because I personally was one of 5 volunteers that worked with the American Community Club, and we served well over 50 people sometimes a day in a completely dilapidated building with issues all the way around. And we were just there to make sure that people weren't freezing outside. But at the time, because I was being displaced, I brought all of my tapestries and my art goods, and I was trying to get people in there. But I know in the music field, it was really hard to get anybody in that space because we had no management at all. We didn't have a National Guard. We didn't have all these people coming together to aid in that situation. We were kind of on our own, basically, no matter how many cries for help we put out there, nobody showed up. So I'm just wondering if there's a possibility to, really shed awareness on the folks that need housing in that time frame, and how we as a community across the board, all of Providence and outside of Providence, there's a large music and arts community all over the state, and I think including everyone in the conversation, just making a merge kind of happen there, with music and arts, not just music and arts. Background services are extremely important and necessary and a part of the conversation too. But I mean, I had just to bring up one small example, and he's passed since then. But a man named Matthew, he had gone to school for journalism. He was struggling with addiction. He was in the Living Club, and one of the first times I ever approached him, and it's Rhode Island, so this is kind of a funny story. But one of the first times I approached him in the Lithuanian Club, he was very dazed and just not. He had like a blank look on his face. I'm sure we've all encountered people in that situation and have been in that situation before, maybe not to the severity. And I just approached him with a canvas and I said, "You look like you can draw. I bet you can draw." And I gave him the canvas and he just lit up and was like, how did you know I actually do draw? I went to college for journalism, and I brought notebooks and pens, and he had just started journaling and writing poetry every day. In the thick of his addiction, in the thick of the winter, in the midst of this dilapidated building where people were just finding places to sleep. I mean, we dealt with 3 floods in the building where one of 3 volunteers were mopping the floor, and you had to throw, and it was like a crazy crisis like situation. So being that this space is like functional, and then we're able to actually have the backing of the National Guard there, you know, help us, is there any faculty for us as a community to be able to support these individuals in a different manner and really showcase the entire state and even the world, sorry, you know, that we can really heal people with. Yeah, I think that's my question.
Yeah, I think what, maybe it doesn't seem that way on the surface, but our understanding is one of the biggest challenges of the warming shelter has actually been to get an operator to run it. And operators are not jumping at the, to run it because the building is super challenging for that specific use. What we said was we would never be an impediment to making that building available. Because the work we did allowed for the building to actually gain occupancy, like by all means, they're going to use it as they find an operator through the winter. I think the state's bigger challenge is that the room that they're talking about in there is limited than maybe 2 of these rooms. And they're having significant challenges with the state fire marshal board and building inspector board because there's no plumbing in the Armory, like there's very few bathrooms, like it's not ideally set up. All of the infrastructure in the Armory is in the basement. That's where all the big group bathrooms are, and we don't have a safe means of getting from that level to the drill hall level. So they have so many challenges to make a very rigid 120-year-old building usable even for the warming shelter. But I think, you know, there's way more challenges ahead of them if they wanted to make that a more permanent use.
This is not intended as a permanent use. There's an immediate crisis right now. The goal is to redevelop the building, not as like a warming shelter, as like a permanent thing. This is just a temporary thing because of the immediate crisis people are faced upon.
It was initially announced from December till April.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
the long-term vision for the building is this development. It is not a warming shelter, but the building is unlikely to be. The development plan did not stop the building from having this immediate use. And this is not the long-term vision.
For sure, and I will say, you know, it's gonna be the challenge for all of us, because this is not the first time that the state has kind of done like a temporary warming shelter over the winter. This is just the first time they've chosen the Armory for the location. You know, what happens is come April 1st, those beds are still needed, right? And so I think it becomes a challenge for, I know that's something the council is gonna be focused on in the next year, but also, of course, our state rep and senators to be advocates for how we're solving that problem. It's obviously not going to be over on the focus, but yeah, in terms of a short-term solution with the cold weather.
So I want to get the card question.
I just wanted to say that I'm excited. The neighborhood, working with our elected officials, have been advocating for this armory for years and years. We've seen it empty with not almost anything happening for too much of that time. But then there's been some proposals, but almost nothing has ever felt exactly right. It's just we wanted something in that building. And I just, I think I've told Everett many times I'm skinny because this feels right. I so appreciate Scout's inclusiveness. They're wanting to have the community be part of it and help shape what it is. They appreciate the light touch of the building so that the building is respected. So it just feels like there's respect and inclusion all around, and it kind of feels like I think what we've all been wanting for so long, and so I'm really excited to see what comes. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, elected.
My name is Desiree, and I just first I want to compliment all of you for being here because it shows that you care about the community, and thank you for taking on this project. I'm just getting a little familiar with it. Members of the community have stated it to me, so I'm here in a couple of different capacities, if you will. I myself, with Erica and David, one other volunteer, were at this said shelter in the beginning of the year. I look forward to hearing the recording so I can process some of the questions and feedback and input you've had, because it sounds like a tremendous project with multiple layers to it. And I think it's something that Rhode Island needs. So I would
offline. Love to chat a little bit more and ways to be able to support that and better understand how do we support a couple of pieces of that. One is, you know, the individuals that are displaced right now. And then secondary to that is just, you know, understanding a little bit more about the development that's coming forward to include, you know, the arts community, because I think that's significant here on Rhode Island, right? You know, and it just, you know, thank you for being here. I think that there's a lot of conversations. There was a lot of uncertainty swirling around what was going to happen for the different phases. So do you have a plan with, you know, like a phased targeted approach that explains, you know, when and how and things are going to be developed and who's involved to kind of provide the wraparound services and provide additional support for the development of, you know, the art spaces?
Yeah, we made a proposal of how we see that happening in the state. The state is in the position now to determine if they want to support that vision. I think I said earlier, it really is about early activation. I do think that the warming shelter is a bridge. I think that what we had maybe initially planned, you know, with World Cup viewing and in a weird way, like, you know, it takes a long time to get in front of the state fire marshal, and that work, while intended for something else, ended up benefiting a real need right now. And so I think that makes sense. And I think that like this community's been nimble enough to like, you know, figure out how to, you know, deal with challenging issues. And that's certainly what this is going to be. So I will say that like what we intend in the beginning is going to be more pliable and less kind of traditionally rigid in development in nature. And it's like, I think it's as much of the feedback of the community is how do we kind of fill the glass of the Armory with what happens.
We have contacts. We can talk later, but the last piece I'll say, to just take it offline, is from the ADA compliance. If you know, take it offline just to make sure that, you know, there is a representative here in the Rhode Island community for ADA compliance as far as ramps are concerned. So I think that, you know, may be a good connection to have from that perspective.
We've actually met with their offices.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
So I just want to say, I'm a strong believer that community is not going forever. I understand people do have to go home, go to sleep, put their kids to bed, to hit dinner. But I promise, I'm gonna stick around to ask, hey, if anyone has any additional questions, I'll answer any of them. I will stick around. Few questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. So I really want to thank everyone for coming out here on a night so close to the holiday season and for caring about this building and this community. And so I really want to say thank you to everyone for coming out. And I'm really hopeful that it's been decades and we have not gotten all the funding yet or anything like that. But for the first time, I'm actually really hopeful about the project. And for a while, I was pessimistic that we would ever see real progress. But I'm hopeful, and I really hope that we can actually get some. And I think that'd be awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
Ron or Bob? Jason. Ron or Jason. Nice to meet you.
Afraid of heights, but I still took the opportunity to do it.